Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Parallax Abstraction, and welcome to Retro Flashback on Halloween! I'm sorry. I wanted to try to do that, the whole, make the Halloween voice thing, but I am just bad at that, man. I figured I'd try anyway, but, well, I just look like a jackass. But what else is new? Anyway, yes, how's it going, everybody? So, you may remember that last year on Halloween, I did a whole series of videos, one a day in fact, called Retro Flashback Halloweek. And, well, doing 5 videos in 5 days just about put me in the grave. So, this year, between Extra Life and everything else, it was just a tough one. So, I'm just giving you one today, but it's a goodie. So, hope you're going to enjoy this. This is one of my favorite, more scary themed games, I guess. We've talked about Castlevania before on this series, but this is arguably one of my favorite Castlevania games, and there's a number of them that I like. But this game is interesting for a whole bunch of reasons. So I am on record correctly as saying that the Castlevania original platformers are the better Castlevania games and way better than those dumb friggin' open-ended frustrating adventure games they have now. And this is among my favorite of those, and what makes it interesting is that this was actually a launch game for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. So this is Super Castlevania IV. The first and third Castlevania games on the NES were really, really good. Castlevania II, Simon's Quest, was more like those modern adventure games I don't like, except way, way worse. We'll talk about that someday. But this is one of the first games that came out on the Super NES, and it blew my mind because its production values are through the roof, it plays incredibly well, it has not only one of the best spooky soundtracks of the Super Nintendo, in my opinion it has one of the best Super Nintendo soundtracks, period. It was to the point where, back in the 90s, I actually sent a letter to Konami's American office, which was based in Illinois at the time, and said, hey, do you guys, have a CD of this or something that I can get? This is before MP3s and all that jazz. I was like, do you guys happen to have a CD of this I could buy? Because I would really love to get it. And they actually wrote back and they said, we don't, but we're looking into it. Never actually happened, which is kind of a bummer. But, just the soundtrack in this is haunting, and it's a gorgeous game. The level designs are amazing, and it really took full advantage of the Super Nintendo hardware, which is something you frankly don't see in launch titles very often. Launch titles are usually kind of like a tech demo that doesn't really... They're usually not great games, they're just good showpieces. So we're going to get into this here. So... yeah, so it has just a password system if you want to continue your game. We're going to start fresh here. Not much in the way of options. It does have a way to appreciate the soundtrack, which is it has one of these sound test modes, which is always kind of cool. Gives you the means to do that. No, it's not. There we go. So as you can see, you've got that there. And really, I mean, the story of this is pretty simple. Like most of the original Castlevania games, you are a member of the Belmont family who is out to kill Dracula, who is raised from the dead again and is wreaking havoc again. It's not very complicated, but doesn't have to be. And here we go. So, in many ways, this does play like a pretty bog-standard Castlevania platformer. You start with a very basic whip, and within a few moments, usually within hitting a few of these sort of candles that are hanging around even outside, because I don't know why. This was really cool at the time. This is sort of the lead-in where it's like, hey, you're getting trapped in here. I really like that. So yeah, these within a couple of hits of these candles, your whip will get 2 upgrades, a chain whip and then a longer chain whip, both of which do more damage than the standard one. And in addition to that, the candles drop special weapons, which in this case is a dagger. There's also holy water, time stop, a boomerang thing, very similar to previous Castlevania games. They also drop plenty of these hearts, which are the ammo for your special weapon, and which will also provide a score bonus at the end of a level, the more of them you retain. You can also find things hidden in walls, including mysterious chicken wall, what has become known as the mysterious wall chicken, which are basically chicken dinners that heal you. I don't know why, but apparently that works. I wish it was that simple. And of course, like a lot of the other original Castlevania platformers, this has an actually fairly in-depth scoring system that, as you can see there, can get apparently pretty massively huge, but it ultimately doesn't matter because this is another game that does not have a high score counter, because I don't know why you develop a score system and don't have the simple high score counter, but so be it. So here's one of the wall chickens. I'm here. We don't actually need this, but that would have healed me pretty much in full. So the score system does allow you to receive extra lives. At certain score milestones, you will receive extra lives. So it does serve a purpose for that, I suppose. And, you know, in spite of that, there's a little invulnerability potion that's utterly useless. In spite of that, I still like it. You know, even if it doesn't properly have a high score system, I still like any game that keeps score. So, hey, I'll forgive them for that. They still put in most of the effort, so that's cool. So, right now, you're probably saying, well, this just kind of looks like regular Castlevania, except a little spiffier. And in some ways, you're not wrong, but there are a couple of little different additions, which is that, number one, you can obviously, because you had a lot more flexibility with the Super Nintendo controller, you can use your whip in more interesting ways, you can send it in directions. And this is a really cool feature here that comes into play at some points later in the game. So if you hold the button, you let your whip go kind of limp. Yes, I know what jokes you're thinking of. And you can rotate it around, and it kind of has a little bit of physics on it. Now, this may not look terribly useful, but there are certain enemies later, especially enemies that are placed in certain ways, where having the ability to do that will actually come in very handy. And there's certain secret rooms in that where you'll find sort of a whole bunch of candles in rapid progression, and you can just sort of do this to clear things out, because you will get like a lower power, lower damage hit on anything that does impact your whip that's in this form. And in addition, you can do this now. I always thought that was really cool. So, whenever you see these little grapple things, which are apparently sentient because they move, you can swing yourself along, and you can retract and extend your whip as you do it, and obviously, as you can see, all of a sudden you gain the ability to sort of phase through the level environment. Realistic, no, but that would be certainly very required. Oh, you dick. Oh, you dick. Okay, I usually know this guy. There we go. Jeez. And at certain points later in the game, this will become utterly critical to traverse. And I'm not gonna lie, also like other Castlevania games, this one gets really, really tough later on, and very unforgiving. I have beaten this game, but not since the 90s. I can still get a decent amount of the way through it, but it gets really tough. And but it has some interesting progression ideas as well that you're going to actually see in the course of this playthrough here, because I can get through these levels reasonably quick. Let's get some health here. Oh, no, that's a double hit instead. So this basically doubles the... I always forget this. This doesn't double the damage of your whip, but I believe it doubles the damage of your special weapons. And there's actually also a 3 that you can get as well that's very handy. So if you can hang on to that until you get to the boss, it's very, very useful indeed. I still love this music. This is not my favorite tune, but it is a good one. So there's Holy Water. I'm not going to pick that up. I'll show you that later. Holy Water. Whoa, jeez. Holy Water can do a lot of damage, but it has a terrible range on it. So generally, depending on the situation, either the dagger or the throwing axe or the boomerang is what you want. Let's hit this guy in an angle here. There we go. Oh yeah, and we have the weird horse heads, because we're in the stables, and I guess we have sentient horse heads now. Oh yeah, and occasional ones that are upside down that can also fly at you. Oh jeez. So... okay. So, I mean, at the end of the day, really what this is is what was the Castlevania formula up until this point, really just polished up for what at the time was next generation, the transition from 8-bit to 16-bit. And I thought they did it masterfully. We're probably not going to get to... There's a really interesting section in one of the later levels that I don't think we're going to be able to get to today. That horse does not look like he's having a good day in the background there. You see that? Oof. And now, of course, we have the stupid Medusa heads, a hallmark of any Castlevania game. As you can see here as well, you also have these bits in the floor that actually do not do anything if you walk over them, but if you jump on them, they flip, so you gotta watch that. Now, I do have time stop here, which makes dealing with these twits a lot simpler. The one nice thing about this as well is that because the Super Nintendo had triggers, it's all you have to do is hit the right trigger button in order to set off your special weapon. Whereas on the NES, you had to hold up and press the fire button, which was sometimes a little bit finicky, especially in the heat of battle. So you see right there, there's a good reason to use your sort of your limp whip, as you will. And in many ways, this is a refinement of that formula, but it does some interesting things. There is a level later in the game that made use of the infamous Super Nintendo Mode 7 technology, where you're on sort of a big rotating, I believe it's a clock piece, and the level is sort of rotating behind you. Alright, so here's the first boss here, which I'm mostly going to be able to cheese using special weapons here. Now, also the case with most Castlevania games, this guy normally sort of jumps up and down at you like that. There we go. Also, as with most Castlevania games, the first couple of bosses generally are pretty simple. I was actually running low on time there, which is very unusual in a Castlevania game. So you get bonus for your remaining time and your remaining hearts. So that's Mode 7 right there. You see that zooming effect. That was what was known as Mode 7, which today looks, you know, almost quaintly crude, but back then was mind-blowing. And this game used some of that to great effect. Like, this game, honestly, is still one of the better-looking games on the Super Nintendo and made incredible use of the system's technology for a launch game. Like, it usually takes a few years before developers figure out how to make the most of, like, how to squeeze the most out of a particular platform's specifications. And the guys at Konami, I believe this was Konami's Tokyo studio that developed most of these games, were just masters at this. They really squeezed a lot out of the Super Nintendo early. And it wasn't perfect. I mean, like a lot of Super Nintendo games... Let go of me, you bugger. Like a lot of Super Nintendo games, there are slowdowns in parts, pretty massive ones, as you're going to see later. But by and large, the game was super solid, and really looked incredible. And this soundtrack is just great. I just love... Now we're doing, like, you know, sort of boppy horror. One of my favorite songs is still coming up, and you'll hear that. And yeah, overall, this is really one of my favorite Castlevania games. Oddly enough, a lot of opinion I've read on this is fairly mixed. Some people think... So here's a little secret here. Really satisfying to fling your whip around and get all that stuff there. I whip my whip back and forth. I whip... No, it doesn't work. Yeah, some people... There's a lot of... I don't know of anyone who says that this game is really bad, but I know of some people who say that they think, yeah, it's okay, but it's not great. Even among people who like these older platformers rather than the dumb modern adventure games. Which I find interesting. I know a lot of people are a big fan of Dracula X and... the rare TurboGrafx and Genesis Castlevania games that came out, which I don't dislike at all. But I still think this is one of the better ones out there. It's just super solid. And what I really like is there's a lot of level variety as well. You know, it's tough. One of the things that makes this tough is the very weird jump that Belmont has. You know, for a guy who's clearly as hyper ripped as this guy is, I mean, you know, maybe it's because he's wearing heavy armor or whatever, but he jumps not very high, and when you're in the air, you have very little control over him. You can change your direction, but it takes so long for momentum to catch up. As you can see, you really kind of have to get your jump right off the bat. If you don't, you're kind of screwed. And that's where a lot of this gets difficult. Similar to the Mega Man games and things like that. It was, it's mechanically difficult, not just difficult in terms of its raw design. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of that too. There's some tough levels, there's some tough enemies, there's some times where the game is just outright mean, but a lot of it is a result of the fact that you frequently have to... The game will frequently demand some very precise jumps out of you. And if you can't make those, well, you're gonna have a problem. And... Oh, no, you don't. Ah, there we go. Take that wall chicken. And this game does have checkpoints, but they're not very frequent. So you may find yourself on a regular basis having to go way back. There's a particular section that we're going to get to here that when I was younger was brutal. It took me a long time to get through, and every time I would screw it up, you'd have to do a big part of it over and over again. Oh, shoot. As you can see there as well, you also don't get a lot of time to pick up power-ups. They fade out very, very fast. So it's a tough game. I would say it is largely tough but fair. Its design, especially in terms of traversal, maybe demands perfection a little bit, but that's not inherently unfair as long as you know what you're in for. So here's a boss here. Now this is the interesting part. I'm going to show you this when I take out Medusa here, which is not too hard. Gotcha. Took a lot of life. I usually do better than that. Oh, interesting. Level's not over, is it? Huh. And now we're into this section, and this is what is kind of interesting, is that the game did things like that. It would have mid-bosses, and it was not always just... In this one, it was not always get to the end, fight a single boss, you know, move on. It sort of mixed things up a little bit. And now you can see we're in this interesting area where we're sort of going along a stream that somehow, I guess he's got a pumping station at the end, it's able to rapidly change direction on the fly. So we were going with the grain before, so we were walking a lot quicker, but now you can see it switched on us, and now it's switched back again. So, and we're killing these harpy things here, which thankfully only take one hit. And as you can see, you want to be careful when you jump, because there's spikes everywhere, and I believe those spikes are insta-death. We're not going to test that, but I believe they are. There's one on the ground. Now it's changed again, and now we get to the end of this. Alright, here we go. Now you may see I'm not actually using special weapons much. A lot of people focus very heavily on special weapons in this game, and there are certainly times when they're appropriate, but I do find that one of the things that can really screw you in this game is by using them too much and not having enough of your hearts and stuff in reserve. I kind of like the idea... There we go. Man, I'm getting extra lives like you wouldn't believe here. This is cool. But one of the things that I've always been... Your whip is a very diverse weapon, and I've always sort of been of the mindset that you should focus on that when you can, and try to save up a lot of hearts, both because it's good for bonuses, which can lead to extra lives, which is very important for the later game, and just because the situations where you really, really need those special weapons, you're often going to be needing to spam the hell out of it, so you really want to make sure that you keep a lot of ammo in reserve. Some people would disagree with that. So now we're at the end of this. And as you can see, the stage ended. So it actually gave us a boss in the middle of the level, which strangely enough didn't provide any bonus when we killed it, but there's no end boss. It suddenly goes to stage 3, which I thought was a rather bold decision. That very much goes against the grain of how these games were. And this is one of my favorite songs in the game. It's beautiful, it's simple, and it's haunting. You're in this kind of cave that's like... I actually think this is a very beautiful environment. You're in this cave... Oh yes, here's an interesting enemy, and this is where the slowdown comes in. Ugh! But it's worth it, in my opinion, just because it's such an interesting enemy. But you're in this environment that I think is very beautiful. You're in a cave that's full of... a water cave that's full of stalactites and such, and it's actually a very bright environment, which is... This is a game with a dark theme, obviously. But it sort of goes... It's still sort of a very bright, very beautiful environment, and it has this very melodic, simplistic song that goes along with it. It's almost ambient-like. I'm gonna let you hear this a bit. Yeah, I love the music in this game. It's one of my favorite 16-bit soundtracks. What ho, a secret? Yes, indeed. All right. Here we go. Money for days! And wall chicken. And I got hearts galore. We're doing pretty well here. Considering I usually suck at games when I have to talk over them, and I haven't played this in quite some time, I'm actually rather impressed with how well I'm doing. So I'm gonna actually turn around here, because there's an option to pick up. But this is what I love about this game, is just the variety. Like, it has the great soundtrack, as I've harped on about, but it has a lot of variety in said soundtrack. Little slower ambient things like this. The upbeat stuff from the beginning of the game. Oh, slow down. Oh, there we go. The levels look different. There's a lot of different enemies, a remarkable number of different enemies. There are a decent variety of bosses. As I said, it's a challenging game, but not in an unfair, cheap sense. It demands a lot of you, but if you're willing... Ow. But if you're willing to give it what it's asking for and put in the effort, you absolutely can excel at this. You know, plenty of people speedrun this game. These older Castlevania platformers are actually very popular among speedrunners. Because they are very linear games that have set enemies and whatnot. And here's another really good tune coming up here. Like, isn't that just great? It's so haunting, and I feel it really fits the tone of the game so well. Now, this is the area where I tend to fall down a lot. There's a lot of very complicated platforming here. Not a lot of really complicated enemies, per se, but there's a lot of complicated platforming, a lot of having to swing around on those hooks. And it makes things rather interesting. So let's see what we can do here. Even back in the day, it used to take me a number of attempts to get through this area. But, I'll see what I can do here. Generally, I get worse at games like this as I get older. In my old age, my reflexes tend to be not so great anymore, but oh, jeez! But I'm doing okay here, actually. And talking over it, so I don't know, maybe I've actually refined my ability a little bit. Who knows? So, hopefully I'm giving you a good idea here of why this is one of my more favorite Castlevania titles. And I mean, the Castlevania titles are in many ways synonymous with Halloween because they're based around, you know, loosely based around Dracula fiction, and they are about fighting monsters and spooky environments. I mean, they're not, and there we go. This is where stuff starts to go bad. I will say the sample when Simon gets hit and dies is rather funny. It's just kind of an and it does the whole echo effect when he falls down a hole, which I always thought was pretty funny. I mean, this isn't really what I would call a horror game. It's, truth be told, horror games are sort of few and far between back in this era because it was very hard to do something truly scary with 16-bit artwork. Dang it. Not that it was impossible. Last year we showcased Clock Tower, which is an excellent horror, basically a point-and-click adventure game that was done on the Super Nintendo, and that game is bloody scary for the 16-bit era. It was certainly doable, but I don't necessarily think that's what they were going for with this either. This series was really more an action game that was based on some interesting fiction that people like, or that the designers liked, and but I think it's also a very fitting game for this time of year, and I really do think this is one of the best Castlevanias of what I believe are the best era of Castlevanias. So many people will disagree with me on that, but I have tried those Castlevania adventure games, man, and they don't do it for me. I prefer the linear tight platforming focused game where it's like, you are Simon Belmont, you are here to kill Dracula, go do that. There's just something nice about that simplicity, you know? Alright, let's see what we can do here. Also, those things that you may be seeing that I'm trying to avoid them, as I'm sure you've already deduced, those cannot be killed. You can hit them to stun them very briefly, but it's kind of a pointless thing to do. They cannot be killed. So, you've got to just work with it. Screw you, bat. We can get past here, that'll be a good thing. If I could actually get past this area on video, I will feel pretty good. And as you can see, obviously, this is not forced scrolling. Like, the game is not forcing me to... Let's just skip that. The game is not forcing me to go at a certain speed, but the screen will not scroll back down. So when it moves up, you're stuck at that plane. And here we go. Again... We're in the same level, but it's a totally different area, totally different music, totally different visuals, totally different enemies, and totally different hazards, like this. Wire crates falling from the skies? Hell if I know. Dracula's a mean mofo. And we got flamey teary eyes, and all kinds of crazy stuff. So yeah, if you're looking for a cool retro title to play on Halloween, as I know many people like to try to dig out their favorite sort of Halloween-themed things this time of year, I think this is a pretty good option. I mean, a lot of the Castlevanias, I would say, are good options. But if you want to really, what I believe is one of the top tier ones, and there are others, which I will talk about someday, that are also very good, this is one I would highly recommend. The good thing, too, is that this is widely available on both the Wii and Wii U Virtual Console systems. I actually own it in both of those places, and it works as most... Shoot. As with most Virtual Console games, it works exceedingly well, and also has things like save states, which makes it very easy to get around some of the frustrating checkpoints, and also not have to worry about writing down passwords for continues. Though if you want to play the proper old school way, that is a good way to do it. This game plays really good, it looks really good, it sounds just beautiful. There are actually a lot of Super Castlevania IV remix soundtracks on Overclocked Remix, which I would recommend checking out. There's some actually really good ones on there. And this game only gets better the further you go on. It will challenge you, as most Castlevania games do, and as indeed a lot of older platformers from this era did. But it's great, and I still think it's one of the better ones out there. So it's a good Halloween pick, and it's easy to get. So all the better. So yeah, that is Super Castlevania IV, developed and published by Konami in, I believe it was 1990 in Japan and 1991 in North America for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Thankfully, oh geez. Thankfully, widely available now, and holds up great to this day, and man, that soundtrack, absolutely love it. My name's Parallax Abstraction. Thank you all very much for watching. If you liked what you saw, please consider liking and subscribing. It does help me out a great deal. And well, happy Halloween. I hope you guys have a very safe and happy and sugary, beneficial Halloween. And well, I will see you next time. Take care, guys.